It was a quiet, suffocating kind of evening, the kind where every shadow in the room seems to hold a secret, and the air is thick with unspoken words. My name is Susan. I'm 38, a mother, a wife, a woman who thought she had seen it all. But tonight, as I stood there in the kitchen, watching my son Alex from across the room, I realized just how wrong I was, because nothing could have prepared me for this. Alex was standing by the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the living room. He looked different tonight, older, stronger, with a confidence that hadn't been there before. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was a man now, and the way he looked at me sent a shiver down my spine. He stepped closer, and I felt my heart race, the blood pounding in my ears. "Mom," he said softly, his voice lower than usual, almost hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." I tried to keep my expression calm, to hide the trembling in my hands. "What is it, Alex?" I asked, forcing a smile. But even as I said it, I knew. I had felt the shift between us for months now, a strange, unspoken connection that had grown in the silence of our home. It was there in the way he looked at me, the way his touch lingered just a second too long. He stepped closer, until he was standing right in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I've tried to fight it," he whispered, his eyes searching mine, filled with an intensity that made my knees weak. "But I can't anymore." My breath caught in my throat. This was at the moment I had dreaded and longed for in equal measure. "Alex," I began, my voice trembling. "This is wrong. You know that, don't you?" He shook his head, his hand reaching up to gently cup my cheek. "I don't care," he said, his voice rough emotion. "I love you, Mom. Not just as a son. I love you." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I should have pushed him away, should have told him to stop, but I couldn't move, because deep down I knew I felt the same way. It started months ago, back when Alex came home from college for the summer. I remember the first time I noticed it, that look in his eyes, the way his gaze lingered on me just a little too long. It was a hot day in July. He was out by the pool shirtless, the sun glistening off his tanned skin. I was sitting on the patio, pretending to read a book, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. He caught me staring, and for a moment neither of us looked away. There was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, something dark and raw, something that made my heart skip a beat. I quickly looked away, feeling my face flush with heat. What kind of mother looks at her son like that? But that was just the beginning. As the summer went on, the tension between us grew thicker, almost suffocating. It was in the little things, the way his hand would brush against mine when we passed each other in the hallway, the way he would sit just a little too close on the couch, the way his eyes would roam over me when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, after Mark had gone to bed, we were sitting together on the couch, watching an old movie we'd seen 100 times. I don't even remember what the movie was about. All I could think about was how close he was, the warmth of his body against mine. I felt his hand on my thigh, a light touch that sent a jolt through me. I should have pushed it away, should have told him to stop, but instead, I found myself leaning into him, my head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around me, pulling me closer, and for the first time in years I felt safe, wanted. He tilted his head down, his lips brushing against my forehead. "Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with a kind of raw, aching need. "I can't keep pretending." I looked up at him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Neither can I whispered back, and then his lips were on mine, soft at first, hesitant, as if he was afraid I might push him away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, pouring all of my loneliness, all of my forbidden desire into that kiss. It felt like jumping off a cliff, like letting go of everything I'd ever known. We pulled apart, both of us breathless, staring at each other in shock and disbelief. "What have we done?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he replied, his eyes dark and filled with something I couldn't name, "but I don't regret it." From that night on, everything changed. We became secretive, stealing moments whenever we could. A touch in the kitchen when no one was looking, a lingering kiss behind closed doors. It was wrong, I knew that, but I couldn't stop. I was addicted to him, to the way he made me feel young, alive, desired. But with every kiss, every stolen moment, the guilt grew stronger. I was his mother. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to protect him, to guide him, not this. Not fall in love with him. Then, one morning, I woke up and knew something was wrong. I was late. My hands shook as I took the test, waiting for the result, praying it would be negative. But when I looked down and saw those 2 pink lines, my whole world came crashing down. Positive. I was pregnant. My first instinct was to hide it, to pretend it wasn't real. But I knew I couldn't keep it a secret forever. I had to tell Alex. He deserved to know. I found him sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. When he looked up and saw me standing there, he must have known something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I couldn't speak. I just held out the test, my hand trembling. He took it from me, staring at the result, his face going pale. "You're pregnant?" he whispered. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Is it mine?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, Alex, it's yours." He stood up, pulling me into his arms as I sobbed against his chest. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, Mom. We'll get through this together." But even as he said it, I knew there was no going back. We had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the road ahead was dark and filled with uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of our situation began to sink in. I was carrying my own son's child, a secret so dark, so twisted, that it felt like a noose tightening around my neck with every passing day. I avoided looking in the mirror, unable to face the woman I had become. The guilt was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, whispering that I was a monster, a mother who had failed in the worst possible way. But in the quiet moments when it was just me and Alex, the guilt would fade away, replaced by something deeper, something I didn't want to admit to myself. Because the truth was, I loved him, not just as a son but as a man. He was everything I had ever wanted, everything I had been missing for so long. And that was the part that terrified me the most. One evening, we were sitting together on the back porch, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The air was thick with the scent of summer, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. He reached over, taking my hand in his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft and filled with concern. I shrugged, forcing a smile. "Tired. Sick. Scared." He squeezed my hand, his gaze locking onto mine. "We'll get through this," he said firmly, as if he could will it into being just by saying the words. "I won't let anything happen to you or the baby." The baby. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I placed my free hand on my stomach, feeling the tiny flutter of life growing inside me. It was a part of him, a part of us, a symbol of the forbidden love we had shared. And despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate it. "What are we going to do, Alex?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the crickets chirping in the yard. "How can we possibly explain this?" He looked down, his expression turning serious. "We'll have to leave," he said quietly. "Start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knows us." The idea of leaving everything behind, our home, our family, our entire life, was terrifying. But what other choice did we have? If anyone found out, it would destroy us both. We would be outcasts, judged and condemned by everyone we knew. "Where would we go?" I asked, my voice shaky. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a determination I hadn't seen before. "Anywhere," he said. "As long as we're together, we can make it work." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could conquer everything, that we could find a way to be happy, despite the odds stacked against us. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. A few days later, Mark came home early from work. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he walked in, his face pale and his eyes wide with an expression I couldn't read. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables. He swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He held it out to me, his eyes locked onto mine with a look of raw betrayal. I took the paper from him, my heart sinking as I unfolded it. It was a doctor's appointment confirmation, a prenatal visit, with my name clearly printed at the top. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice cracking. "How? We haven't been together in months." I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands trembling as I tried to think of something to say, some lie that would make this all go away. But there was nothing. The truth was staring us both in the face, undeniable and unforgiving. "It's not yours," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He stepped back, his face twisting with a mix of shock and disbelief. "Then whose is it?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Who have you been with?" The words stuck in my throat. I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell him that the father of my child was standing right there, just outside the kitchen door, listening to every word. "Tell me," Mark shouted, slamming his fist down on the counter so hard that the dishes rattled. "It's Alex," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but the look on his face, pure, unadulterated horror, made me wish I could take it back. "Our son?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're telling me you're pregnant with our son's child?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry," I choked out. "I never meant for this to happen." He let out a strangled cry, turning away from me as if the sight of me made him sick. He stumbled out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. I could hear the sound of his footsteps as he ran down the hall, followed by the slamming of the front door. I sank to the floor, burying my face in my hands. I had lost everything: my husband, my marriage, my family. And for what? For a love that was never meant to be. Later that night, Alex found me sitting on the floor in the dark, tears still streaming down my face. He knelt down beside me, pulling me into his arms. "I'm here," he whispered, kissing the top of my head. "I'm not going anywhere." I clung to him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, the steady beat of his heart. I told him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He knows. He tightened his grip on me, resting his chin on the top of my head. It doesn't matter, he said fiercely. We'll leave tonight. We'll start over, just like we planned. I looked up at him, searching his eyes for any sign of doubt, but there was none. He believed that we could somehow make this work, and in that moment I realized that I did too.